Welcome back to the SportsMax zone. West Indies are set to tour New Zealand from November 27 to December 15 for 2 tests and 3 T20 internationals, their second series this year. They had been to England in the summer for 3 tests in what was the first international cricket assignment of any kind since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. New Zealand have been hailed as one of the most successful nations in managing the pandemic, with just under 1,500 confirmed infections and 25 deaths. CWI President Ricky Skerritt said, "We are pleased to be able to fulfill our obligation to tour New Zealand as we continue to get our ICC Future Tours program back on track in spite of the financial difficulties we face. I want to thank CWI CEO Johnny Grave and Director of Cricket Jimmy Adams and their operations team for successfully partnering with NZC to make this tour possible. West Indies have won just one of their last 8 tests against the Black Caps and have not beaten them at home in 25 years. Well, joining us now to discuss the tour of New Zealand and other matters is the CWI President, Ricky Skerritt. Welcome.
To be with you. Good evening.
Pleasure to have you. All right, so I'm going to get right into it. Of course, West Indies has been championing the cause, of course, playing cricket during a pandemic. And, many other countries looking on have, seen us as a model. We're getting ready now to face New Zealand. In New Zealand, are we expecting to have a similar situation when our Windies team head to New Zealand?
Similar situation to England, you mean? Sorry?
Yeah, as in the biosecure, and of course New Zealand, being known.
Yes. So basically the medical protocols that were worked out so stringently and very, very conservatively a few months ago with the ECB are pretty much the model that is still being used. It is, it's better safe than sorry. So the extreme caution, we are erring on the side of safety wherever there is that need. But we're pretty confident that, the players' safety and health are in good standing.
New Zealand, of course, being hailed for, managing the pandemic better than most countries. Of course, only 39 active cases right now. Our captain, Jason Holder, I remember at the end of the England tour, he was, very vocal in speaking about the mental health of players. And of course, just being in this biosecure bubble. Based on the fact that New Zealand has been handling the pandemic in the way that they have, do we expect the players to get a bit more leeway?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that after the quarantine period, they will be able to integrate into New Zealand life. Because whereas they were not able to leave the bubble at all for the period in England. And of course, in the case of Jason, he would have gone straight into another bubble in Trinidad for the CPL, and he's now in a bubble in Dubai and Sharjah and Abu Dhabi, wherever their hotel is in the UAE for the IPL. So I've never been in a bubble myself, and I'm sure that it could be quite challenging to go through the same routine on an ongoing basis and see the same people over and over again for a long time. And I think Jason was suggesting that it was a bit of a mental strain, but you get better at it. I'm sure that they have now understood that is a way of life for cricketers, at least in the meanwhile. But the good thing about New Zealand, because New Zealand itself is relatively low risk, they won't have to stay. Well, let's put it this way. It depends on how the situation within the New Zealand health authorities pans out. But we are hoping that they'll be able to integrate into the community once they've gone through certain minimum checks and quarantine periods.
Yeah, Ricky, the ODI captain for England, Owen Morgan, spoke publicly today, and he suggested that players are free to withdraw from tours if it is that the biosecure environment is too mentally stressful for them. Having said that, are you happy, are you encouraged by the low numbers of West Indies cricketers that seem unwilling to go on these biosecure bubble tours?
Yes, we had a couple of players in the England tour that backed out. We had one lady who backed out of the women's tour to England, and now I think it's 3 players have said that they prefer not to participate. We have said from the beginning that players would be respected in terms of their own assessment of the situation, usually with their agents, their families, and so on involved. We want to give every player that confidence that they will be safe, but if they have a doubt, then stay out.
Yeah, having said that, we've heard various sporting internationals talk about these biosecure bubbles, and you just mentioned that you haven't experienced one yourself, but suggesting that it probably is a lot safer than if, you know, these individuals were out living their normal lives.
I could tell you, I was a little bit more involved in the details of the first one, the England tour, because it was a pioneering effort, and I wanted to be very much on the ball with knowing all of the arrangements. And I was fascinated with the extent to which the medical experts were going. I mean, everything to keep absolute safety there was no stone left unturned. These players are treated with very, very safe hands by the local officials. The medical people are screening constantly. They're doing testing. I mean, when the women came back from England, for instance, they had been tested 6 times in 5 weeks. You remember the controversy about Phil Simmons leaving the
Yes.
bubble in England. Phil Simmons went through about 5 tests in about 7 days. So the protocols are absolutely right on the button, doing everything possible to keep these players safe.
Yeah. Coming back into the West Indies here in the Caribbean now, Ricky, I know that some cricket has been resuscitated in a few of the islands, Barbados, I think St. Vincent and the Grenadines have had some cricket themselves. But for the most part, sport continues to be stalled by the COVID-19 pandemic. You are steeped in a political background. You know how politicians think. You know how governments think. How difficult are you seeing the next few months as far as resuscitating cricket is concerned? Because I think we have accepted that from a Cricket West Indies regional competition standpoint, it seems there will be no cricket for the rest of the year.
A couple of things. First of all, we just this past week produced a draft schedule of international and regional cricket for the approval of our board in our meeting last Thursday. And you're right, the first regional cricket that we're proposing is next year, the Super 50 at the end of January. So we're not proposing any regional cricket. We're not hosting any international cricket before I think it's Sri Lanka. Forgive me, I don't have the details at my fingertips here, but which will be around February or somewhere. We go to Bangladesh in January, February, and then we have 3 teams coming spread more towards the summer rather than the early part of the year. We have Sri Lanka, South Africa, and Australia. So we hope to publish all of that, Lance, in the next couple of weeks as we begin to fine-tune venues and so on. Obviously, the problem is where is suited to host, where can we create the protocols, including the biosecure bubble that we spoke about. And so a number of changes have to be looked at, a number of options. But at the local level, we just listened to the presidents of the various territorial boards speak about their efforts to restart local cricket. And I'm happy to say that in certainly more than half of the territories, local cricket is at least preparation, net sessions, academies, practice sessions for the franchises and so on is beginning. So we're very hopeful that will pick up steam. St. Vincent had a T10 competition earlier in the year, which raised a lot of eyebrows, but also raised a lot of hope
It was live on SportsMax, actually.
Live on SportsMax, and I gather that there's another one being planned as we speak. So we are encouraging local cricket, everything we can. Obviously, the Barbados Cricket Association just shared some of their protocols with some of their colleagues. St. Vincent had shared some of the protocols. In other words, we're looking for best practices as we go along. But in terms of regional air transport and the ability to move players around and deal with the restrictions, that is not something that we could look towards for at least until about towards the end of the first quarter next year is what we're hoping.
Mr. President, I'm part of a cricket group that has some eminent past cricketers and commentators and other figures who are already up in arms over the announcement consequent upon the naming of the team for New Zealand, that some players who have opted not to go to New Zealand have been drafted in the Sri Lankan T20 League. How is that particular issue going down with you and other members of Cricket West Indies, the hierarchy?
I think you're talking about one player. Let me just say that I think two things you need to look at. First of all, we don't know for a fact that a player is drafted and seeking to play in that league until such time as we receive requests for NOC. We have received none for the player involved, and so we have to assume that he's not playing until such time as we see evidence that he's playing. But let me just remind you that, first of all, that particular player is not contracted to Cricket West Indies. Some years ago, the courts basically told Cricket West Indies that you cannot restrain the trade of players who you have not contracted otherwise. So where a player like him is not contracted, he has every right, every legal right to ply his trade wherever he seeks to or deems appropriate for him to do so, even if he's invited to play for Cricket West Indies. There's no obligation whatsoever. Now, is that something that we like to hear? Of course not. We would like to believe that it's, country above self, West Indies above leagues and so on. But our policy is very straightforward since I have come to the fore. Bearing in mind the legal situation, we believe that players must be encouraged to play for their country and for the region based on the conditions and the environment that we create and the relationships that we build with them, and that we need to do everything we can to prepare them both physically and mentally.
That's clear to me. Thank you for that. But let me ask you this. In the same way that the individual has their prerogative, freedom of trade, to sign up for whichever entity is retaining their services, then are you saying as well that Cricket West Indies, by its own prerogative, has the right, when selecting a squad, to ignore someone who has suddenly made themselves available on the ground that, well, we're looking at those who have committed to us in the past and foregone other personal assignments over some who chose to look after their own interests rather than representing Cricket West Indies?
Well, that's where we differ with the previous administration. Players will not be punished. Selectors will not become disciplinarians. Selectors will pick the best available players who want to play at that time or who are obligated, as in the case of contracted. The selectors will deal with each situation individually, but the selectors can also decide that if there is a player who doesn't fit into their long-term plans, that they don't pick that player, even if that player is performing well. But that is up to the players based on selection policy, which ultimately says we want to put on the field of play the best available team at any point in time. Selectors cannot be, will not be members of a tribunal of disciplinary proportions.
Excellent to hear that from you. Excellent to hear that from you. One more before we go. We're out of time, but I had to ask this. Watching the West Indies women over the past few series, Mr. President, has been difficult. There are things that we as commentators can say that you as Cricket West Indies president would not be wise for you to say so, even though it would provide great sound bites for us, but we wouldn't want you to say that because of the heat that it would bring on you. For instance, if we look back at what happened in England, I must say, watching some of the performances, it was like watching a train crash, Mr. President, frame by frame. And I said, well, with the appointment of Courtney Walsh as the full-time coach, and what we saw in England and the clear gap between what was a world-class, very competitive unit being outclassed by England, this perhaps is an opportunity for Cricket West Indies to press the reset button on women's cricket to get us back to some semblance of competitiveness. And I'm sure you'd agree with that perspective.
Well, absolutely. But let me just say that the Courtney Walsh appointment didn't happen by accident. The timing of the announcement was not by accident. Courtney has been very busy in the last couple of weeks, and Courtney and Jimmy are working feverishly to put together now elements of a plan which will operate in ways that we can best afford, because obviously we wish we had more money to invest in the women's team. But we are putting together a plan for preparing the women for the next international outings and building on it on a sustainable level. We won't be chopping and changing people like crazy like we've done in the past with coaches and management supporting acts. And basically, you're going to see a lot of attention to the women. And then at the same time, we have to try to spread the talent pool by developing more cricket leagues with women. We started an under 15 program across the region, which unfortunately got hurt by COVID. But what I would suggest to you, George, is that you get Jimmy Adams and Courtney Walsh on this program within the next, give them another couple of weeks or so before they could get some more things in place.
Right, I certainly will, because my producer has been tasked with doing that. Just the last thing before we go, you would agree though also that where the physical fitness is concerned, I mean that's the basic building block. That's where the germination will occur. That the physical fitness of our women needs to be addressed seriously. And I keep going back, Mr. President, to Lance coming across the Australian squad when he was vacationing in Barbados and coming back to say to a woman they were as fit as, I wanted to say as fit as butcher's dogs, but some people get that the wrong way. They were as fit as fiddles. No, the body mass index, the muscle tone, the definition, these looked like professional athletes. Our ladies, unfortunately, do not look like that. Can we be assured, Mr. President, that there is a concerted plan to get the West Indies women fighting fit once again and for the rest to take care of itself?
The plan seeks to optimize use of the time in between tours for fitness and technical preparedness so that the women are in much better shape when they actually show up for a tour. That has been one of the biggest problems with the men and the women, and you see we've made significant strides with the fitness for the men, and standards are being set and standards will have to be adhered to. I think you will see that over the next few months, the women's situation will be significantly improved.
Well, if I'm holding you to anything, Mr. President, it's the women, because really, it ought to be better than what we're getting. And with the resources that we are investing in, Cricket West Indies we don't have everything we'd like, but for what you and your colleagues are spending, I'm sure you're not getting value for money and you need that. Thank you very much for your time. And we'll carry on this discussion with Jimmy and Courtney when we get them in another 2 weeks.
Thank you very much.
All the best to you. Cricket West Indies President Ricky Skerritt. We take a break, back with more.